So good day everyone, my name is John Luis Patino. I'm currently studying BS Criminology, second year at Negros Oriental State University, main campus, Dumaguete City. And today we're gonna discuss about the institutional-based correction under my subject CA 200. So this will be the topics that we'll be discussing as well as the sequence of how we're gonna tackle each one. So included in our lesson 1 is first, global view on prison administration. Second, prison antiquity to modernity. Third, the influence of the Roman Catholic Church, Pope John Paul, the pro-life Pope. Fourth, Walnut Street Jail or Walnut Street Prison. And the next, King Henry VIII. And last, King Edward VI, a jewel of King Henry VIII. So of course, before we start, let me present to you the objectives of my discussion. So, it is expected that after this discussion, audiences will be more knowledgeable about the global view on prison administration and understand prison antiquity to modernity. Second, come to know more about the influence of the Roman Catholic Church and Pope John Paul on the prison administration and correction. Next, understand the origin and history of prison administration and institutional corrections. And then last, understand the prison system. So I hope you are all ready to watch, listen, and learn. So without further ado, let's start. First off, prison administration. So according to Carlson and Garrett in 1999, prison administration fundamentally involves the application of leadership and management techniques to correctional institutions. So when we talk about correctional institutions, what comes into our mind is the BJMP. The Philippine correction system is composed of institutions, civil society, and the business sector involved in the confinement, the correction, and restoration of persons charged and or convicted delinquent acts or crimes. So more information about these are the prison administration duties. It provides range of services that supports the Department of Corrections and its officers working in such institutions. Service include management, budgeting, overseeing policies, procedures, and conduct audits. The primary responsibilities is to perform administrative tasks, reports are written as well as daily logs about inmate behavior and anything notable happening during their shifts. Then secondary responsibilities is to train new hires and develop programs for training. Administrative support is also given. Processing inmate paperwork is also done. So usually our perception about the prison administration is only get about guarding inmates and punishing criminals. Well, there are a lot of responsibilities in this career or in this sector. So here are the ministries responsible in the Philippines. First is the Department of Interior and Local Government, which jails for pretrial and short sentences. Second, the Department of Justice, the National Prisons for sentences over 3 years. And then third, the Department of Social Welfare and Development, or the DSWD, caters centers for children in conflict with the law. Then here are the prison administration in the Philippines. First is the Bureau of Jail Management and Penology, BJMP. Second is Parole and Probation Administration. Then Bureau of Corrections, BUCOR. Then Board of Pardons and Parole, BPP. So what is the Department of Interior and Local Government, or the DILG? So the DILG, it promotes peace and order, strengthening the capability of the local government to effectively deliver basic services and ensuring the public safety. The mission of the Bureau: the department shall promote peace and order, ensure public safety, strengthen capability of local government units through active people participation, and a professionalized corps of civil servants. Vision of the Bureau: a strongly determined and highly trusted department committed to capacitate and nurture local government units, public order and safety institutions to sustain peaceful, progressive, and resilient communities where people live happily. The goals: peaceful, safe, self-reliant, and development-dominated communities. Second, improve performance of local governments in governance, administration, social and economic development, and environmental management. Third is sustain peace and order condition and ensure public safety. The objectives: reduce crime incidents and improve crime solution efficiency, improve jail management and penology services. Third, improve fire protection services, continue professionalization of PNP, BFP, and BJMP personnel and services. Next is enhance LGU capacities to improve their performance and enable them to effectively and efficiently deliver services to their constituents. Last is to continue to initiate policy reforms in support of local autonomy. Next will be the Department of Social Welfare and Development, or the DSWD. So, the DSWD is to develop, administer, and implement comprehensive programs designed to improve living conditions and empower disadvantaged children, youth, women, and older persons, persons with disabilities, families in crisis or at risk. So the mission of the Bureau is to lead in the formulation, implementation, coordination of social welfare and development policies and programs for and with the poor, vulnerable, and disadvantaged. The vision of the Bureau is that the Department of Social Welfare and Development envisions all Filipinos free from hunger and poverty, have equal access to opportunities enabled by a fair and peaceful society. Its objectives is to establish performance measures to monitor and evaluate social welfare and development program performance and impact on cases covered by supervision. Second is to improve worker agency performance by providing or accessing to technical support to recipient of supervision. Next, facilitate on-site and participatory problem solving on case management with service provider, LGU, NGO, and the DSWD. And last is to assist service providers in enhancing capabilities to manage of cases of an individual, family, group, or community. Next is the Department of Justice, or the DOJ. It is the government's principal law agency. The DOJ serves as the government's prosecution arm and administers the government's criminal justice system by investigating crimes, prosecuting offenders, and overseeing the correctional system. The function of the Bureau: administration of the criminal justice system, legal counsel of government, regulation of immigration, international cooperation, provision of free legal assistance, and alternative dispute resolution. The mission of the Bureau: effective, efficient, and equitable administration of justice. The vision of the Bureau is a just and peaceful society anchored on the principles of transparency, accountability, fairness, and truth. Bureau of Jail Management and Penology, or the BJMP. So what is it? It supervises and controls all district, city, and municipal jails. It also directs operation and administration of jails nationwide with prolonged tasks of safekeeping and development. The function of the Bureau is in line with its mission. The Jail Bureau endeavors to perform the following: formulate policies and guidelines in the administration of all district, city, and municipal jails nationwide, implement strong security measures for control of inmates, provide for the basic needs of inmates, improve jail facilities, and promote the general welfare and development of personnel. The mission of the Bureau: it is to enhance public safety by ensuring humane, safekeeping, and development of persons deprived of liberty, and in all district, city, and municipal jail for their reintegration to society. The vision of the Bureau: a premier institution highly regarded by society for the secure and humane treatment of persons deprived of liberty by its competent and motivated corps. The major programs. There are 4 major programs under the mandate of the PJMP, and they are the following: Inmates Custody, Security, and Control Program, Inmates Welfare and Development Program, the Decongestion Program, and last is Good Governance. Next is the Bureau of Corrections, or the BUCOR. It is an agency supervised by the DOJ that is charged with the custody and rehabilitation of national offenders that were sentenced to serve a term of imprisonment of 3 to more years. The mandate of the Bureau undertaking the following: confine persons convicted by the courts to serve a sentence in national prisons. Second, keep prisoners from committing crimes while in custody. Next is to provide humane treatment by supplying the inmates basic needs and implementing a variety of rehabilitation programs designed to change their patterns of criminal or antisocial behavior. And last, engage in agro-industrial projects for the purposes of developing prison lands and resource into productive bases of profit centers, developing and employing inmate manpower skills and labor, providing prisoners with a source of income, and augmenting the Bureau's yearly appropriations. The mission of the Bureau. So, the effective safekeeping and rehabilitation of national prisoners. Then, the mission of the Bureau is improve national prisons conductive to the reformation and rehabilitation of inmates that will bring them back into the mainstream of society as useful citizens of the country. So here are the 7 operating units: the New Bilibid Prison in Muntinlupa City, the Correctional Institution for Women or CAW in Mandaluyong City, third, the Iwahig Prison and Penal Farm in Puerto Princesa City, Palawan. Then next, Sabalayan Prison and Penal Farm in Occidental Mindoro. Next, San Ramon Prison and Penal Farm in Zamboanga City. Then the Leyte Regional Prison in Abuyog, Leyte. And then Davao Prison and Penal Farm in Panabo, Davao Province. Next is the Parole and Probation Administration. So it is created through Presidential Decree number 968 and is given the added function of supervising prisoners who are, after serving part of their sentence in jails, are released on parole pardon, and investigates and supervises first-time minor drug offenders who are placed on suspended. The function of the Bureau. To carry out these goals, the agency, through its network of regional and field parole and probation officer, performs the following functions: to administer parole and probation system. Second, to exercise supervision over parolees, pardonees, and probationers. And then last is to promote the correction and rehabilitation of criminal offenders. The mission of the Bureau. The mission of the Bureau is to rehabilitate and reintegrate persons on community-based corrections for peace and social justice. The vision of the Bureau. By 2024, the DOJ PPA is the ASEAN's model of community-based corrections in crime prevention. The goals is the administration's program sets to achieve the following goals. So, promote the reformation of criminal offenders and reduce the incidence of recidivism, and then provide a cheaper alternative to the institutional confinement of first-time offenders who are likely to respond to individualized community-based treatment programs. So next will be the Board of Pardons and Parole. So the Board of Pardons and Parole recommends precedent pardons for those who have been pardoned and released on parole. For those who have been pardoned and released on parole, the Parole and Probation Administration is in charge of overseeing the rehabilitation of both parolees and probationers. According to the Department of Justice experience, the two offices conduct complementary or related functions. Composition of the Board. The Board of Pardons and Parole shall be composed of Secretary of Justice or his representative, who shall serve full-time as chairman. Second, the Administrator of Parole and Probation Administration as ex officio member. And then next, a sociologist, a clergyman, an educator, and then last, a person with training experience in correction work and a member of the Philippine Bar. The global view on prison administration. The Philippines held the 6th highest prison population out of 21 Asian countries. 2 out of 10 persons are incarcerated, and there are 932 prisons running in the country, but they are mismanaged and overcrowded. So the global prison, the crisis. A large number of prison systems around the world are at stage of crisis, the serious effects of which harm prisoners, their families, and societies as a whole. Populations in prison cells has been growing rapidly with an estimate number of 10.2 million people in penal institutions. So imprisonment disproportionately affects people living in poverty, and imprisoning large segments of society places a significant burden on state budgets, and has been an obstacle in implementing standard minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners. It also runs the risk of degenerating dangerous places for both prisoners and staffs. The right mandate. Within the United Nations system, or the UNODC, is ideally placed to assist member states in addressing the prison crisis by supporting human rights compliant penal reform initiatives. The office supports the implementation of international standards and norms on crime prevention and criminal justice and serves as the Secretariat for intergovernmental processes initiated to draft or revise such standards. So, factors contributing to the crisis. First is insufficient measures to prevent crime, in particular youth crime. Second, excessive use of pre-trial detention. Third, lack of access to legal advice and assistance. Fourth, punitive criminal justice policies and inappropriate use of imprisonment. Next is scarce use of alternatives to imprisonment. Next, insufficient measures to promote social reintegration, and then inadequate prison management and infrastructure. Next is detention used as its first resort for children in conflict with the law, and last, specific needs of women offenders and prisoners are not met. So next will be the Philippines incarceration system. So I have 5 facts about the system. First is that severe overcrowding rather. Duterte's election led to the infamous war on drugs and eventually overcrowded prisons. Manila City Jail, the largest jail in the Philippines, is split into dorms that safely house 170 inmates. Currently, these dorms house around 500 people. Similarly, a room designated for 30 people holds about 130 in the Quezon City Jail. So, as proven to be effective, the president's war on drugs not only just served its purpose, but also put a lot of pressure in our incarceration system or our prison system. Number of prisoners rose to the highest during his administration. So, pre-trial detainees. According to the World Prison Brief, 75.1% of incarcerations within the Philippines incarceration system are pre-trial. In 2018, 141,422 of 188,278 prisoners were pre-trial detainees. Unfortunately, many people are serving sentences without conviction. So this is really a sad truth. Due to the slow crawling justice system our country has, there are still many yet people serving sentences without conviction. There are many factors affecting this, and I hope this is tended to real soon. So, high death tolls. About 5,200 inmates die annually at the New Bilibid prison. According to Ernesto Tamayo, the hospital medical chief, these deaths are due to overcrowding, dirty living conditions, and inmate violence. At the 2019 Philippine Senate hearing, Tamayo said there were uncontrollable outbreaks of pulmonary tuberculosis. Next is vigilante justice. Jobless citizens were recruited to kill anyone suspected of dealing, buying, or using drugs. This was one of the few ways for some people to make money. Many homeless and impoverished people joined the vigilante teams. The Philippines police force and unidentified gunmen have killed 7,000 known drug dealers and users. Corruption. In August 2018, the public learned a former mayor may have been released from prison for good behavior. He was originally charged for rape and homicide in 1993. Similar stories of corruption in the Philippines prisons continued to emerge. In September 2018, the public learned that a woman was told her husband's sentence would be shortened if she paid 50,000 pesos. So our next topic will be prison antiquity to modernity. So, history about prison antiquity to modernity. The earliest records of prisons come from the first millennia BC, located on the areas of mighty ancient civilization of Mesopotamia and Egypt. During those times, prisons were almost always stationed in the underground dungeons where guilty or suspected criminals spent their entire life either awaiting that sentence or a command to become slaves. Greece. The birthplace of modern democracy is an exception to this norm. Prisoners were housed in dilapidated, secluded buildings where they were frequently visited by friends and family. Simple wooden blocks attached to their feet were the primary source of their confinement, rather than dungeons, high walls, or bars. The Roman Empire. The ancient Roman Empire, on the other hand, proceeded to employ harsher tactics. Their jails were nearly entirely subterranean, with squeezing corridors and cramped chambers. Prisoners were imprisoned in the basic cells and were shackled to the walls for life or for a set of period of time. Because slavery was the recognized norm at the time, the majority of individuals who were not sentenced to death were sold as slaves or utilized as labor by the Roman authorities. Next, slaves were used as gladiators. Throughout the Roman Empire, which was one of the most well-known uses for slaves, many slaves were tasked as a support crew in addition to fighting in the arena, often after a lifetime of training in specific gladiator training houses or ludices. Allowing the popular gladiator industry to run more smoothly, the huge Colosseum arena in Rome, the most famous gladiator battleground, had a slave army of 224 slaves who labored daily as a power supply. The English royalty. In 1166, Henry II ordered the construction of the first prison as well as the first draft of the English judicial system based on the jury system. In 1215, when King John signed Magna Carta, which specified that no one may be imprisoned without a trial, one of the most extreme prison laws was enacted. Between the 6th and 18th centuries, as the industry grew, English prisons became overcrowded, and the new criminal procedures like as military pardon and penal transportations were employed. The 20th century. The contemporary prison system was completed around the end of the 20th century. In 1991, the concept of probation service was developed, and 3 years later, the first jail dedicated entirely to confining inmates in permanent isolation was established. Those supermax prisons grew into popularity across the United States. With more than 40 in operation in 2005, inmates in those jails are kept in cell isolations for 23 hours at a time, with occasional community yard time, labor educational programs, and cafeteria meals. Over 9 million people are predicted to be imprisoned worldwide as of 2006, with the United States leading the way in terms of incarceration rates. So, prison. What is prison? A prison is an institution for the confinement of convicted persons of serious crimes, is used interchangeably with jail. The difference between jail and prison. So a jail is intended for short sentence and or short-term holding facilities for inmates awaiting trial, and there are any local facilities under the jurisdiction of a city, local district, or country. Prison. A prison is operated by a state government or the federal. That are designed to hold suspects convicted of serious crimes. These are designed for long-term incarceration. The pros of prisons. Prison allows the government to punish criminals and serve out justice to victims. It keeps the public safe from eliminating the suspects from the society. It allows programs for rehabilitation and re-education to be administered to the convicts. It allows punishment that is consistent and long-term that may stop convict from reoffending. It gives suspects the time to reflect and change, and deters future criminals. The cons of prison. It is very expensive on the part of the taxpayers since most prisons are state-funded. Prisoners lose family connections. Family of convicts may fall apart. There is still a high reoffending rate, which suggests that criminals are learning from fellow criminals. Prisoners have a hard time getting a job after prison. Function of the prison. There are 5 basic functions of a prison. First is social isolation and confinement. Second, repentance. Third, punishment and deterrence. Fourth is protection. And last, reformation. Social isolation and confinement. Isolating an offender from the society since he or she is considered as a threat to the community's stability and cohesion, and to keep him or her out of the streets and safely confined in order not to disturb the peace of mind of the persons on the streets. Repentance. The offender is kept in isolation in order to reflect and ponder of his actions and the consequences it has to bring to him, his family, and to the society. Punishment and deterrence. To inflict pain and suffering to the inmate for violating the law set by the government, and to ensure that law-abiding citizens are rewarded through penalizing lawbreakers. That, through this, members of society may be deterred from committing crimes. Protection. Protecting the society from criminals by making it known to the public that violations they have made so that others may be alerted and warned. Reformation. The inmate's values and motivations, attitudes, and perceptions are changed in order to resocialize him and restore him to the society. So, next is that question is the prison system effective? Research shows that long prison sentences have little to no impact on crime. It is believed that criminals are more likely to commit after serving time in prison because they are further exposed to all sorts of criminal elements. Second, yet with right funding and investment, special courses dedicated to the inmates' rehabilitation and reformation is very effective to change convicts to law-abiding citizens. Studies have shown the high incarceration have led to low crime rate in some countries. It is best to accommodate each convict since research suggests each offends due to different reasons. But then criminologists argue that prison does not alter behavior and that there is a very high chance that they will reoffend after leaving prison. Prisons are considered as schools of crime, since prisoners have indicted that they learn more in committing crimes during their time on prison. Prison is very costly. With half of the offenders back in prison after 2 years of freedom, the state budget is given extra burden. Matthews in 2003 believed that maximum security prison makes the prisoner worse. With them spending total isolation for more than 10 hours in less than more than 5 years, convicts may develop some sort of psychological illnesses and may not know how to function properly in society. So our next topic will be the influence of the Roman Catholic Church, Pope John Paul, the pro-life Pope. So here's what we should know. Throughout history, religion and morality have had a significant impact on criminal justice. The set of established standards and norms of behavior in society is known as morality. Morality is a common component of religious belief. One of religion's key functions is to impose control over its adherents by establishing and promoting rules and conventions for them to follow. As a result, these guidelines aid in the development of criminal legislation in government's judicial system. In jail, religion is generously valued for its contribution to an inmate's personal growth and development. The focus is on inmates' perceptions on religion's influence in reducing their chances of recidivism. Other reasons are that it emphasizes the immediate value that faiths have for convicts in terms of coping and survival. Religion's influence in practice and correctional facilities is as old as the institution itself. Religion was most likely first introduced into jail by religious individuals who were also incarcerated. In the Old Testament, such prisoners include Joseph and Jeremiah. And in the New Testament, John the Baptist, Peter, John, and Paul. The early Christian church, beginning with Constantine, offered shelter to criminals who would otherwise have been maimed or killed. Although most countries outlawed it by the 15th century, the practice of releasing convicts during Easter and appeals by church authorities to pardon or decrease the sentences of offenders persisted for centuries, with the latter remaining in use in unmodified form. The use of church-run prisons or replacement for corporal or lethal punishment became popular. The Roman Catholic Church established the correctional tactics that were later adopted by secular states, such as the monastic cell, which served as a site of punishment for criminals. The Protestants of Amsterdam erected a women's correctional facility in 1593 and a men's one in 1603. In Rome, the Sisters of the Good Shepherd created women's correctional facilities, while Pope Clement XI built the famed Michael Prison in 1703 as a home of correction for younger criminals, emphasizing separation, solitude, labor, and prayer. The Vatican jail functioned as a model prison architecture for Europe and America as late as the 18th century. So, Pope John Paul V. Pro-Life Pope. He believes that the inviolability of human life is a primordial and fundamental expression of the inviolability of an individual, which is a reflection of God's perfect inviolability. Above all, the widespread clamor in support of human rights, for an example, the right to health, home, employment, family, and culture, is false and illusory unless the right to life, the most basic and essential right and the precondition for all personal rights, is vigorously defended. So we are well known to the fact that that sentence was rampant in the earlier times, but due to this pro-life Pope, Pope John Paul, it was the personal rights and the life of prisoners are vigorously defended. So our next topic will be the Walnut Street Prison. So here's what we should know. The Walnut Street Prison was a pioneering effort in prison reform. Originally built as a conventional jail just before the American Revolution, it was expanded in 1790 and hailed as a model of enlightened thinking about criminals. The prison, in fact, was known as the penitentiary, from the Latin word for remorse. It was designed to provide a severe environment that left inmates much time for reflection. But it was also designed to be cleaner and safer than past prisons. The Walnut Street Prison was one of the forerunners of an entire school of thought on prison construction and reform. The prison was built on Walnut Street in Philadelphia as a city jail in 1773 to alleviate overcrowding in the existing city jail. Although designed by Robert Smith, so as we all know, the man on the image is Robert Smith. He is Pennsylvania's most prominent architect. The building was a typical U-shaped building, designed to hold groups of prisoners in large rooms. By and large, the role of prisoners was to incarcerate criminals. There was a little regard for their physical well-being, nor there were any attempts to rehabilitate them. Prisons were overcrowded and dirty, and inmates attacked each other regularly. Those who served their sentence came out of the prison probably more inclined toward a criminal life than they were before their incarceration. It was the Quakers of Philadelphia who came up with the concept for what they called penitentiary, a place where prisoners could reflect on their crime and become truly sorry for what they had done. The Quakers believed that through reflection and repentance, inmates would give up criminal and leave prison rehabilitated. Shortly after the American Revolution, a group of Quakers formed the Philadelphia Society for Alleviating the Miseries of Public Prisons, whose goal was made clear in its name. Later, the group became known as the Pennsylvania Prison Society. In the years after the Revolution, this group worked to encourage prison reform, and its efforts finally paid off in 1790 when the Walnut Street Jail became the first state penitentiary in the country. Walnut Street Complex was a new cell block called the Penitentiary House. Built in the courtyard of the existing structure, it included a series of small cells designed to hold individual prisoners. The cells and the corridors connecting them were designed to prevent prisoners from communicating with each other. Windows were high up, and the cells had 9-foot-high ceilings, and grated and louvered to prevent prisoners from looking onto the street. Each cell had a mattress, a water tap, and a private pipe. Inmates were confined to their cells for the duration of their confinement. The only person they saw was the guard, and then only briefly once a day. They were sometimes allowed to read in their cells, but for the most part, they sat in solitude. The Quakers saw this solitary confinement not as a punishment, but as a time to reflect and remorse. That was the reason the inmates were not put to work. Labor said penitentiary proponents would preoccupy the inmates and keep them from reflecting on their crimes. After some time, Walnut Street and its success was short-lived. Despite the good intentions of the Quakers, the practical matter of housing prisoners became more pressing than desire among prison officials to rehabilitate the inmates. Walnut Street became overcrowded and dirty, and there was no sign that isolated prisoners were being rehabilitated through solitude. By the 1830s, the prison had outlived its usefulness and it was closed in 1835. It was razed and a library now stands on the site. Okay, so our next topic will be King Henry VIII. So, who is King Henry VIII? He was born on June 28, 1491 at Greenwich. Henry was the second son of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. A highly intelligent and athletic young man, he was a man of many talents. He is trilingual, fluent in French, Latin, and Spanish. Henry's scholarly interests included writing both books and music, and he was a lavish patron of the arts. He plays numerous instruments and was a composer. He was also an author and published best-selling books that gained him the title Defender of the Faith. He is best known for his 6 wives, 2 of which were beheaded because of his desire to produce a wealthy male heir, marital bliss, and political alliance. His kingship. Henry assumed the throne at the age of 17. During the first 15 years of his reign, he was able to fight 3 wars with France. It has been argued that Henry founded the modern English nation due to the Act of Union between England and Wales, which brought the Wales into union with the country. Ireland was also unified during the king's reign. He also increased the role of Parliament, especially in regards of taxation. Friendship. Thomas Wesley was Henry's trusted friend and advisor, a very intelligent man who rose to the position as Lord Chancellor and Cardinal. Henry relied on Wesley since the king received little tutoring in politics and government due to Arthur, Henry's elder brother. Henry and Thomas seek to make England as significant as the one of the greatest European nations, but their wars in France didn't bring them success. The falling out. Due to the unsuccessful wars which brought enemies closer to bring down England, Wesley and Henry's friendship was at its depths. The French breaking out was when Thomas was not able to secure the annulment between Henry and Catherine of Aragon. This brought to the dismissal of Wolsey and arrest. He died before he could be brought to trial. The death of the king. His accident on a tournament would be the start of his battle with death. At the age of 44, the king's horse rolled on him, which resulted a crippled leg. Even with this misfortune, King Henry continued with his lifestyle which made him gain weight. He was plagued with leg ulcers, and his obesity was making his health worse. King Henry died at Whitehall, England on January 28, 1547. He was buried next to his third wife, Queen Jane, in St. George Chapel. The King's wife. First is Catherine of Aragon. Next, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and last is Catherine Parr, the wife that outlived the tyrannical king. So, Catherine of Aragon, the first wife. Married to Henry's elder brother Arthur, Catherine was left a widow when Arthur died from a sudden illness. Thus, Henry ascended the throne and married the queen. She was able to give birth to 6 children, but only 1 lived. Henry grew agitated because Catherine wasn't able to produce a male heir. Thus, the pair underwent a messy annulment which led to the creation of a separate church at England. This is because the Pope didn't sign his approval due to Catherine's connections with the church. Henry insisted that their marriage was illegal and invalid due to Catherine's first marriage with his brother. Catherine lived in seclusion and died a princess on January 7, 1536. A messy annulment. Due to Henry's desperation to continue the lineage of the Tudor dynasty, he questions the legitimacy of his wedding with Catherine. He felt that the marriage was cursed because of the belief that God bans marrying the widow of one's brother. Henry needed a papal annulment to marry the now pregnant Anne Boleyn. He petitioned Pope Clement VII, but due to the threats made by Catherine's nephew, the Pope refused to grant the separation. This caused the kings to break free from the Roman Catholic Church. Next will be Anne Boleyn, the second wife. At first, a mistress, Anne was the sole reason behind the annulment between Henry and Catherine. She was pregnant with Henry's child, who was born a girl, much to the dismay of the king. Anne had two more miscarriages wherein Henry suspected that the marriage was a curse. Anne's arrogant manner during the marriage was not helping her either. On July 1563, Anne was arrested for adultery and was the very first queen to be publicly executed. She was beheaded at the Tower of London. Next is Jane Seymour, the third wife, another mistress who married King Henry a week after Anne Boleyn's execution. She was a devout Catholic. He begged Henry to abandon the dissolution of the monasteries, which greatly affected monastic lands, artworks, and buildings. This brought trouble to the marriage. But then, Jane was able to finally bore the king a healthy male heir. This, however, cost Jane her life, who later died because of puerperal fever, which left the king distraught. The fourth wife, Anne of Cleves. Due to the political alliances, Henry was matched with a German princess who goes by the name Anne. They were introduced through paintings in which both parties agreed to get wed. But upon Anne's arrival in England, Henry changed his mind. He infamously referred her as Flanders Mare. The couple annulled 6 months after their wedding, and Anne was given a generous amount of money and was granted several homes. She was frequent visitor to the English court and lived a much more independent life than the first divorced wife, Catherine. Next, the fifth wife, Catherine Howard. A cousin of Anne Boleyn, Catherine was able to catch the king's eye and heart. The couple married in 1540. The king was smitten by her, calling Catherine his rose without a thorn. At this point, Henry was crippled and obese, and thus Catherine returned to her past lover Thomas Culpeper. She was arrested for adultery 17 months after their marriage and was publicly executed on February 13, 1542, the same way her cousin died. It was said that the king was inconsolable and wept openly to the public the day of her execution, which sunk the king into depression. And the last wife, Catherine Parr. She was a widow of two husbands who became before Thomas Seymour, brother of the late Queen Jane Seymour, when the king has noticed her. She was a well-educated and intelligent woman and knew 4 languages: Italian, French, Latin, and Greek. But then, she was a reformist and is fond of debating religious questions with the king. Due to this, she was almost arrested but gained mercy with the king. She was a doting stepmother to Henry's 3 kids and was able to unite and give the kids a taste of stable family life. She was able to marry Thomas Seymour after the death of the king on 1547. So, the death of the king. His accident at the age of 44 would be the start of his ailments. During a tournament, his horse rolled on him, which left him with a crippled leg. Even with his misfortune, the king continued with his lifestyle, which made him gain so much weight. He was plagued with leg ulcers and his weight was not helping him either. Henry died at Whitehall, England, and was buried next to his third wife, Jane Seymour. And our last topic will be King Edward VI, the jewel of King Henry VIII. So, who is King Edward? So, I'm gonna read to you the life story of King Edward. Edward was the pride of King Henry VIII, the son he has been waiting for 20 years from 3 different marriages. His mother, late Queen Jane Seymour, died a few days after his birth. Edward was said to be intellectually precocious, but was not as physically able like his father. He was a sickly kid, and thus, before the death of Henry, the king arranged a council of regency that would rule in Edward's place. So, a very short reign. Edward became king at the age of 9 after King Henry's death on 1547. Instead of the council the late king has prepared for Edward, it was his uncle Edward Seymour who would take power and establish himself as the king's protector. Seymour and Archbishop Thomas Cranmer was very keen on making England a truly Protestant state, a view that the King Edward VI supported. Through this, aspects of the Roman Catholic practices was eradicated, which caused the rebellion in Cornwall and Devon. Seymour had troubles in dealing effectively with the rebellion, which caused his execution in 1552. Northumberland. Edward Seymour was overthrown by the Earl of Warwick, later Duke of Northumberland John Dudley. This was because of Dudley's success in suppressing the rebellion. The Duke assumed the title as protector and put the kings forward as entitled to all the power King Henry VIII had. But in reality, the king was just a mask behind the Duke's control of the government. In 1553, the king shows the first signs of tuberculosis. Before his death, he determined that Jane Grey, the Duke's daughter-in-law, would assume his throne, excluding his sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, from the line of succession. A power struggle erupted after Jane Edward's death in 1553, and thus Lady Jane Grey was able to rule England for 9 days before her replacement of Queen Mary. Where he lays. The late king was unburied because of the long negotiations between the Queen Mary and her ministers as to the mode of funeral rites. The English prayer book was used for the first time at the funeral of monarch after its change from Latin. Edward is buried beneath the original altar of Henry VII's Lady Chapel on August 8. The Tudor dynasty had not prospered to the late King Henry's dismay. So, I'm afraid my report ends here. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you learned and had fun with me. Once again, this is John Luis Patino. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.